Long-time lurker, first-time poster, and English is not my native language, so please excuse any mistakes. A few months ago, I was hanging out with a friend Majd under his apartment complex. It was about 12 a.m., and we were talking about a past incident when a car was following him. It was really creepy. We randomly decided to walk past his complex and take a left, which led us to his vast construction area, where they just started building a giant mosque. As we were walking, I noticed a very tall man who had a coat on and was leaning on a lamppost. It was nothing bizarre. Moss just kept talking and looking at me weirdly because I kept staring back at the man whose hands were in his unusually large coat pockets. We took a left turn, and I glanced back one last time before walking towards the area now, and BAM! He was gone. I still didn't think much of it, and kept walking until we reached our destination. Now, Majd went on talking about supernatural incidents which occurred in his uncle's home, which I was pretty sure he did on purpose because he knew I was afraid of all this paranormal shit, but he didn't seem to give a damn. I was feeling really scared and told him that we should really be heading back. As we were walking back, I noticed someone standing. It was the same man, and he was standing about 20 feet away from me. I literally let out a shriek. No matter how hard I try, I'll never forget the sound I made that day. We had no idea as to how he got there, and that too, this close. It instantly hit us. We held hands and started running. This time we both looked back and saw he was running as well. This part is kind of sad. I, being on the heavier side, started to slow down a bit. My fit friend let go of me as he ran faster and got well ahead of me. Well, I know now who to not trust anymore. He literally would have left me to die, but thankfully, we reached his apartment before that man could catch up with us. I have no idea where that man must have stopped running behind us, as I didn't look back anymore after my so-called friend let go of my hand. So, that's that. This is a story of one of the few strange encounters I've had. This situation occurred to me when I was at a naive age of 12 years old. It was around the summertime, so I was just about finishing up my first year in junior high. The school was pretty far away from my home, so every day I had to take a bus to and from school. My aunt and mother specifically chose the same school for my cousin and I so that we can go to and from school together. Since we didn't have the same schedule, the rule was to wait for each other, depending on who left school first, so that we could take the bus together. We weren't allowed to walk home from school though. It was quite a distance, so they didn't want us to take the risk by walking home. Unfortunately, my cousin didn't always follow that rule. He didn't see the need to take the bus with me every day, and would sometimes go walking home with his friends who happened to live close by him. Most of my friends live near the school, so I had no one to walk with. There were times he did have to take the bus though, depending on his mood, I guess. So one day I headed over to the bus stop, waving goodbye to my friends, and waited. This bus was one of the slowest buses ever, and would often get so packed with people that it would skip my stop. So I usually expected to wait a while. On this day though, the bus stop was surprisingly empty, except for maybe one or two people. It was early summer, so most students would go to the pool or to the park right after school to hang out. Basically, everyone was walking home, except me. Living in New York exposes you to some weird experiences on almost an everyday basis. I was young, naive, and seriously thought I was not likely to run into anything strange. This is probably why I never really paid attention much to my surroundings. However, after waiting at the bus stop for a few minutes, I felt strange. I felt like I was being watched. New York City on a bright summer day meant there was plenty of people around, but somewhere, someone was watching me. I couldn't pinpoint who it was or where they were, but it was such an unmistakable feeling. I tolerated this for a few minutes and just ignored it. If it was bad, it would have already happened. Yes, that was my stupid logic. From time to time, I would check to see if the bus was coming, but it was nowhere in sight. I guess the feeling of being watched was getting to me because I was starting to feel anxious. Right when I thought I was just being stupid, a man approached me. It was like he just appeared beside me. I didn't even feel his presence at all, and jumped in surprised when he asked, "Hey, can you help me?" I never mentioned this, but as a 12-year-old female, I was already around 5'7", which was the tallest in my class. And this guy was around 5'5", so he looked to be in about his 40s, and was Hispanic like myself. He looked pretty harmless. He didn't look like he was high or drunk. He asked me this question in Spanish, to which I responded, "Sure, how can I help you?" Since he didn't look suspicious at all, I relaxed, and was eager to help a person in need. He then asked, how do I get to Avenue B? I looked at him with, I assume, a very confused expression. We stood near a corner where the street sign was clearly visible. It said Avenue B. This was obviously a red flag, even for a naive 12-year-old girl like myself. I held back a chuckle, thinking maybe he couldn't see well, and said, "This is Avenue B." Then he looked at me for a moment and gave me one of the most creepy smiles I've ever seen. It wasn't warm at all. It felt wrong, like he wanted to eat me alive. I instantly felt nervous. Then he said, "You're such a sweet girl for helping me. What's your name?" My heart was racing at this point. "I can't tell you," I responded quickly, and checked to see if the bus was coming. I thought if I brushed him off and ignored him, he would take the hint and leave. It was silent for what felt like hours. I looked around me, at the floor, everywhere except the area beside me. Eventually, I exhaled and checked to see if he had left. Nope. He was standing there intently beside me with that creepy smile plastered on his face. "If you come with me, I'll give you a gift," he said, still smiling. I never hated my cousin more than I did in this moment. Of all the days he decided to walk home instead of taking the bus, it just had to be this day some creep approached me. I knew I couldn't stay at the bus stop. He was persistently asking me questions. He would move his eyes up and down my body slowly. When you're afraid and basically suck at being social like I was, you would never think to ask for help. I don't know why I felt the need to just handle this myself, but I decided to leave this stop and walk to the next one, which was about 4 to 5 blocks away, hoping I could get away from this man. I didn't even bother responding to any of his questions, and just calmly walked away. I was speed walking, and so grateful for having long legs. I reached the end of the first block and looked back to be sure. He was right behind me. "Don't be shy. I just want to give you something," he said, practically pleading. "Nope, I don't want it." I kept walking, looking through the crowd of students, hoping to spot someone I knew. I had no luck, though. So I kept walking until I finally reached the next block. The blocks were short, but felt so far apart in that moment. I only had 3 left. I looked back again, and he was still there, laughing like we were playing some sort of game. This guy was keeping up my pace, even though my strides were much longer than his. He was so close, I can hear him breathing heavily. He was practically jogging behind me since he had trouble keeping up. This guy was seriously demented. There were no cell phones back when this happened, so it's not like I could have called anyone. I didn't want to stop at a payphone to make a call so that he could catch up to me very easily. I didn't want to bother asking a stranger for help either. If anything, I was paranoid of everyone. What if they did the same thing as this creep? I thought. I was an idiot. "Stop walking so fast," he said. Really? I was just about running when magically, one of my classmates appeared. She was walking with a bunch of her friends, and we had a few classes together and hardly spoke to each other at school. But I didn't care. I needed some sort of escape. I walked straight up to her and said, "Hey, Julie, can I walk with you?" I was too excited when I asked her, and she gave me this look and said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" But then continued to look at me. I guess the look of panic on my face was obvious, So she said, "Sure, let's go." I'm forever grateful to her for reading my face so well. I walked with her quietly for a few blocks past my bus stop until she had to turn to go home. I thanked her and looked behind me once she left. He didn't follow us. I jogged to the next bus stop to be sure, and the bus arrived about a minute later. I never saw him again after that day, and never told my mother anything about it until years later. I should have said something in case he preyed on someone else. I'll always regret that. A little backstory before we begin. I'm a 21-year-old female, and I'm about 5'5" and 150 pounds. Not much to me, but I'm pretty stout because that's how I was raised, and this occurred about 3 to 4 years ago. I was working for a Western retail store in a small city near my town. When I first started working there, I had almost immediately noticed that one of the guys that also worked there was a very handsome redhead. So me, being a typical 17-year-old girl, decided to strike up a conversation with him. We'll call him Jimmy. Jimmy seemed like a really nice dude. He had tattoos, was pretty skinny but muscular, and he had very pretty eyes. We started talking throughout my shift, and of course, he decided he would train me, which obviously I was excited about. At the end of my shift, I gave him my number. Fast forward a few months, and I had found out he had a girlfriend, or wife. I wasn't sure what she was, because he referred to her as both, but I digress. I also found out that they were expecting a little girl. I'm not about that life, and don't mess with anyone who is in a relationship because it's wrong and against my moral code, so I cut off any communications I had with him. A few more weeks had went by, and he kept texting me and telling me that he thought I was beautiful. And all of that, which I wasn't fond of, but it seemed harmless. Well, he started inviting me to parties and asking if I would come pick him up, which I refused constantly. Then it went to, "I really like you and think we should be together because my girl treats me like shit." I was really put off by this, but ignored him to the best of my ability, even at work. Then, it got to where messages were starting to make me feel uncomfortable, because he would tell me that he wanted to make me sit on his lap, and how he wanted to have sex with me. By this point, I was very wary of him. Well, one night, I had to close the store, and he was a night shift key holder, so I was stuck with him. And one other moron of a chick that worked there. Our nightly routine was that we had to clean the store, count money, and take out the trash. Well, he decided to do trash, and of course, picked me to help him. I gathered up 3 out of the 10 or so bags we had, and was at the dumpster when he came up behind me. First off, I don't trust people that sneak up behind me, and second, I like him even less than that, so I was really uncomfortable. He proceeds to make me turn around and talk to him about why I'd quit talking to him. He then grabbed my hand so I couldn't push him off me and forced the worst and longest kiss I've ever had subjected on me. At this point, I was completely bewildered and I couldn't believe he had the balls. So I stood there and just looked at him, and when he asked, "Did you like that?" I glared at him and responded with the most angry "Hell no!" I could without shouting. I turned around to walk back in the store. I didn't know I was being followed by him. I tried to open one of the 2 doors that led back to our break room, but as soon as I got it cracked open, he slammed it shut and forced me to hug him. He then pinned me against the door and forced another kiss on me, then another, and another. I couldn't get away. Thank God he thought he heard the other girl that was there walking by, so he stopped, but he still wouldn't let go. He was talking to me, saying that he could treat me better than the guy who had stood me up the night before, and that he had broken up with the girl he was with. And after that, I remember that he finally let me go so he could make sure the other girl working didn't see anything. Of course, stupid me didn't say anything to anyone because he was expecting a baby, and I didn't want his baby to suffer because her daddy is a moron. Stupid choice, I know, but soon after that, he trapped me in the back room and kept trying to get closer to me, but stopped when I told him, "If you try that shit again, I will kick your ass and make you wish you hadn't fucked with me." A few weeks later, he was still with his said girlfriend, who he obviously lied about leaving. I'm not sure what he told her, but anytime she would come in, she would give me a death glare and not speak to me. She hated my guts, so the best I can guess is that he lied and said I threw myself at him, or something along those lines. As a 23-year-old assistant manager at a pizza delivery place, I never would have imagined that a simple necklace could have caused me so much fear. Even to this day, every time I see a dark early 90s Civic at night, I get the chills. Let me start at the beginning. I was an assistant manager with quite a bit of experience with the company, and had been recently transferred to a different store in the franchise. My boyfriend at the time also worked there, so I had no qualms with the idea of being there. I got along well with the employees, as usual. I'm very easygoing and helpful by nature, which eventually landed me in a store of my own. I only had one bad habit. I smoked cigarettes. This meant that I would have to leave someone else in charge of the money at some point during my shift. At this particular store, the key was on a lanyard so that it could be stored on your neck, making access to the till easier. One night, after a particularly stressful lunch rush, I went outside to smoke. I was the only person who solely worked inside, so I gave the key to one of the drivers who I foolishly trusted. To save time and effort, I placed the key around his neck, smiled, and said thank you, be back in a few minutes. I ran out the door and inhaled my cancer stick as quickly as possible. Fast forward to a few days later, and that driver, Pawan, asked me to help him with some calculus homework. As a recent college dropout majoring in mathematics, I of course agreed to assist. Everything went smoothly. He was very kind, and I didn't think much of it at the time. Shortly after this, I was transferred again to yet another store. Fast forward a year later, and all of a sudden, I start receiving phone calls almost daily from a number I didn't even know of. Of course, I didn't answer. I mean, who answers a call from a number they don't know? Then I started to realize they were all from the same exact number. I thought it was just some telemarketing number or something of the sort, so I continued to ignore the calls. One day, after a 14-hour shift at work, I realized I had 22 missed calls from this number and 13 voicemails from this number. I was sitting there wondering what the hell is going on. Then I listened to the voicemails. There were 13 voicemails from Pawan. They started out professing his love to me, then became more and more desperate, ending with 2 10-minute long voicemails of him breathing heavily and crying. I was terrified. What the hell was going on? I decided the best thing to do was to call him back and tell him that I wasn't interested, and that I was dating someone, and that we could never be together. This was a difficult conversation to have with someone who was acting so crazily, but I managed to do so with his grunting and sniffling, and he didn't say a word. A few days later, one of the other Nepalese drivers from the same store who I had remained friends with called me and explained that placing a necklace around someone's neck was something that was performed during weddings in their culture. He then told me that this was all a misunderstanding caused by me putting the till key around Pawan's neck. I told him that a lanyard with a key doesn't count, and he laughed and agreed, but just to be safe, I changed my number. About a month later, I moved out of my parents' house and into my own apartment. Another couple of months later, my mom called me and asked if I knew anyone with the dark green early 90s Civic. I told her initially that I didn't, but then I remembered this was the kind of car that Pawan drove. I called back to let her know, and my dad answered. He told me that this car was parked out in front of the house for the last couple of hours. I explained the situation to my dad, who proceeded to go outside and have a talk with him. I thought that this would be the end of it, but it wasn't. About 6 months later, I was closing the store up with 2 other drivers. It was extremely busy, so we were there for quite a while after closing. Suddenly, one of the drivers said to me with a frightened sound in his voice, "Hey, are you expecting someone?" I replied that I wasn't, and went about my own business. He glanced at me briefly, and then kept staring out in front of the window. He turned to me nervously and said, "I think this guy's gonna try to rob us." I rushed to the window and looked out. It was hard to tell at first with the dark outside, but then I realized who it was. Standing completely still, staring through the giant glass front windows, it was Pawan, with his dark green 93 Civic. He must have seen me there, looking out at him, and he didn't even flinch. I looked at my coworker and immediately told him to call the police. About 10 minutes later, the police showed up. They came through the back and did not initially see Pawan standing out front. The deputy looked out in front and saw him standing there, then turned to me and asked what was going on. I told him what had happened, and he asked me if I felt unsafe. I responded with a simple yes, to which my coworker responded, "Hey, I think he's leaving." The deputy immediately got in his car and followed Pawan. About 20 minutes later, I got a call from the deputy stating that it was safe for me to leave work. He then stated that Pawan told him that we were in a relationship for the last 2 years, and that he called me his wife. I assured him that I was never in a relationship with this man. The deputy told Pawan not to contact me again, or there would be charges pressed, and I never heard from him again. Still, until this day, every time I see a dark-colored early 90s Honda Civic, I get the chills. I will never forget my imagined marriage, and I will never ever put another necklace around someone's neck that is not my husband's.